Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een amma ba'd. Imam Ghazali was going through the various calamities of the tongue, and yesterday we covered some aspects of ghiba, which is backbiting. Today Imam Ghazali speaks about the fifth calamity according to his order in this book, is called Tazkiyatun Nafsi. So Al-Khamisu Tazkiyatun Nafsi. Then he'll speak about the sixth problem, which is cursing. Then he'll talk about the seventh problem, which is praying against people. And the eighth problem, which is joking and jesting. And mocking, actually, more like mocking. So let's look at the first one, which is Al-Khamisu Tazkiyatun Nafsi. The fifth one is purification of the self. This is to show self-purification, to show that oneself is pure in many different aspects. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَدْ قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنِ اتَّقَى. Our translator here translates this as self-justification. That would work as well. So do not justify yourself, do not purify yourself. He best knows those who show piety. وَقِيلَ لِبَعْضِ الْحُكَمَاءِ مَا الصِّدْقُ الْقَبِيحُ فَقَالَ ثَنَاءُ الْمَرْءِ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. Subhanallah, that's a very good one. One of the wise men was asked, what is wicked truthfulness? Wicked truthfulness is evil truthfulness. What is that? So he said, a man's praising of himself. A man's praising of himself is evil truthfulness. Because it's absolutely true what he's probably saying, or she's probably saying that I'm like this and I'm like that. But the problem is that it's said in the wrong way, and it's said with maybe the wrong intention, or it may just have the wrong kind of results. And even if it's not said with the wrong intention, the problem with it is that it could lead to some problems within oneself of ostentation and showing off and showing oneself to be better than the other and so on and so forth. So he mentions all of that. فَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَتَعَوَّذَ ذَلِكَ. Be very careful, be very aware that you do not become accustomed to doing that. And I've seen that it actually can become a custom where it becomes so easy for a person to always be showing off about themselves, to just show that, oh, I'm not like that, I'm not like that. In fact, you see some manifestation of this in some children where obviously they're just doing it with all of their young innocence. Whenever the parent will tell one of them after the other one will say, oh, I don't do that, oh, I don't do that, or I'm not like that, always trying to self-justify that, even though the person who they're speaking to, or they're speaking to them, or is telling the other person off, is going to understand that the other person didn't do it and is only telling the other person off because they did something wrong. But this person always wants to justify that, oh, I didn't do that, or I'm not like that, or is trying to get into the good books. That's a whole different thing. What this is more talking about is where a person constantly keeps bragging about oneself, that I'm like this, or I'm like that, or I'm not like this, or I'm not like that. And it becomes a habit sometimes, because every time something happens and you think that you can relate to that, you'll mention something. So that's the problem. وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ ذَلِكَ يَنْقُصُ مِنْ قَدْرِكَ عِنْدَ النَّاسِ وَيُجِبُ مَقْتَكَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Know that this will drop your status among people. This will drop your status among people, and by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will make His anger, it will call on to His anger. It leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hatred for you. وَإِنْ أَرَدْتَ أَن تَعْرِفَ أَنَّ ثَنَاءَكَ عَلَى نَفْسِكَ لَا يَزِيدُ فِي قَدْرِكَ عِنْدَ غَيْرِكَ فَانْظُرْ إِلَى أَقْرَانِكَ إِذَا أَثْنَوْا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ بِالْفَضْلِ وَالْجَاهِ وَالْمَالِ كَيْفَ يَسْتَنْكِرُهُ قَلْبُكَ وَيَسْتَثْقِلُهُ طَبْعُكَ وَكَيْفَ تَذُمُّهُمْ عَلَيْهِ إِذَا فَارَقْتَهُم فاعلم أنهم أيضا في حال تزكيتك نفسك يذمونك بقلوبهم ويظهرونه بألسنتهم إذا فارقتهم. He uses the same approach that he used in the other one. He said that if you want to know and see how you're praising yourself does not really elevate your status among others, if you want to see that it doesn't do that, then look at some of the people around you, look at some of your contemporaries when they praise themselves. Look for somebody else who praises himself. بالفضل والجاه والمال. either with some kind of honor, there's something that they've achieved or something, some kind of grace that they have, wal jah, or some kind of respect, or mal, or some kind of wealth that they have, like I've got this much wealth, or I've got this car, or I've got that, or whatever. كيف يستنكره قلبك? You know, how does your heart dislike that? And how much of a burden it feels upon yourself. Your nature finds it excessive, he says. Yeah, your nature will find it burdensome. And actually, if you notice that in other people, it's very possible that you may have that problem yourself, and you're just seeing it others, it just makes it sound worse. Sometimes that even happens. وَكَيْفَ تَضُمُّهُمْ عَلَيْهِمْ إِذَا فَارَقْتَهُمْ. And when you leave them, how you will criticize them for that. That, oh, he's just showing off, he just always talks about himself. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُمْ أَيْضًا فِي حَالِ تَزْكِيَتِكَ نَفْسِكَ يَذُمُّونَكَ بِقُلُوبِهِمْ. Then know that in the state, when in the circumstance of you, or in the situation where you are praising yourself, or purifying yourself, or justifying for yourself, they're also going to be criticizing you in their hearts. وَيُظْهِرُونَهُ بِأَلْسِنَتِهِمْ إِذَا فَارَقْتَهُمْ. And when you leave them, they will express that as well. So whenever a person is constantly justifying, and normally this happens that people become on the defensive, and they're always justifying, I didn't do that, or I didn't do this. It just becomes very excessive. The only way you can actually find out is after you've had any discussion with somebody, you should ponder over it. That, did I overdo this? Did I justify too much? Because what happens sometimes is that if a person doesn't justify as much, the other person gets the point, and it makes it actually worse for a person to justify too much, because then it makes it sound like you're over justifying, then the other person doesn't take you seriously. It drops you from their status, from their eyes, in their eyes it drops you. So basically, sometimes just to mention, for example, if there's an argument, or if there's some kind of conflict about something, it's simple sometimes just to mention that you didn't do it, or that was not you, or whatever, instead of sitting there and justifying it for 10 minutes, where you're overdoing it, and the other person is then going to think that there's really some issue there, or something like that. So it's a very fine line sometimes to draw, especially when you have to exonerate yourself about something that somebody is blaming you for. So anyway, the next one here is as-sadis, or the seventh one in this chain of calamities, is al-la'nu, which is cursing. فَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَلْعَنَ شَيْئًا مِمَّا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مِنْ حَيْوَانٍ أَوْ طَعَامٍ أَوْ إِنسَانٍ بِعَيْنِهِ أَوْ تَقْطَعَ شَهَادَتَكَ عَلَى أَحَدٍ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْقِبْلَةِ بِشِرْكٍ أَوْ كُفْرٍ أَوْ نِفَاقٍ. So beware of cursing. Be careful that you don't curse anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. Whether it's an animal, whether it's some food, or whether it's a particular human being. Try to avoid cursing anybody that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, because inadvertently you're cursing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His creation. أَوْ تَقْطَعَ شَهَادَتَكَ عَلَى أَحَدٍ. Do not be categorical in bearing witness against any of the people of the Qibla, or any Muslim, to the effect that he is a polytheist, or an infidel, or a hypocrite. So don't say in very definitive ways that such and such a person is a kafir, or such and such a person is a mushrik. Right, a polytheist, or that such and such a person is definitely a hypocrite, because these are all internal things. These are things that have certain manifestations outside, but then again there could be a ta'wil. Like even if a person is going around wearing a cross, right, it's possible that there may be some reason why he's doing that, or that he's forced to do that, or give some kind of ta'wil. Of course, you don't have to deal with them as you would deal with other Muslims, in the sense that you don't have to be all buddy-buddy with them and, pray with them or whatever. But, it's better to say something like, I saw him doing something of kufr, as opposed to saying that he's a kafir now, right? And if they have a ta'wil, if they have some kind of excuse for what they did, then try to accept it, because it's very possible that happened because you can't really see what's in the heart. And this would probably go back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he got really angry on Usama ibn Zayd radiyallahu anhu, because he had killed a person despite the person having said La ilaha illallah, which is kind of the opposite scene. But the point there was هَلَّا شَقَقْتَ عَنْ قَلْبِهِ, that had you opened up his heart, had you teared open his heart to check inside, because it's something you can't see, it's something that you can't do even if you do open up the heart. فَإِنَّ الْمُطَّلِعَ عَلَى السَّرَائِرِ هُوَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, because the only person privy to the internal self is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَا تَدْخُلْ بَيْنَ الْعِبَادِ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ, so do not enter between the servants and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّكَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا يُقَالُ لَكَ لِمَ لَمْ تَلْعَنْ فُلَانًا أَوْ لِمَ سَكَتَّ عَنْهُ. So here, I think, by cursing, he's talking about kind of cursing people to hell, cursing people to disbelief, right? Like such and such a person is a disbeliever, such and such a person is out of the pale of Islam. That kind of a cursing is meant here, and maybe not just petty cursing of, just swearing at somebody and using a bad word on somebody. And he said, no, that on the day of judgment, it's not going to be asked from you that why did you not curse such and such a person, or why did you remain silent from it? Like, why didn't you curse somebody? That's why, although some scholars do allow cursing Yazid, for example, other scholars like Ghazali says that what's the point? Why do you bring such an expression on your own tongue, and you pollute your own tongue and your own mouth? There's no point of it. What are you getting out of it? Yes, if you have to show somebody how evil he was for a particular reason, that may be an exception. But just in general, to curse somebody of that nature, why even pollute your tongue with it? There's no point in doing so, because he's already gone to what he sent forth in the hereafter, and Allah is already dealing with him or taking care of him in that sense. So there's no point of view. It's not going to make it any worse. بل لو لم تلعن إبليس طول عمرك ولم تشغل لسانك بذكره لم تسأل عنه. In fact, more still is the fact that even if you do not curse Iblis, the greatest of your enemies, your entire life, you never cursed him even once, and in fact, you never used your tongue to mention him at all, you're not even going to be asked about that. So basically, we are only responsible to remember Allah. We're not responsible to curse Iblis. Yes, we're responsible of asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection from shaitan. But it's not necessary for us to curse Iblis or go around cursing the shaitan. وَإِذَا لَعَنْتَ أَحَدًا طُولِبْتَ بِهِ وَسُئِلْتَ عَنْهُ. The opposite of that is actually true, where if you do curse somebody, then you're going to be asked about that, you're going to be called on that, and you're going to be asked about it. If you don't curse somebody, you're not going to be asked why you didn't curse. But if you do curse somebody, then you're going to be called and asked about it. If you can justify why you cursed them, all fine. If you cannot justify, or you were a bit excessive over the amount of justification, then you're going to be in trouble. So there's no point. وَلَا تَذُمُّنَّ شَيْئًا مِّنْ خَلْقِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَقَدْ كَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ لَا يَذُمُّ الطَّعَامَ الرَّدِيَّ قَطُّ وَكَانَ إِذَا اشْتَهَى شَيْئًا أَكَلَهُ وَإِلَّا تَرَكَهُ. Now, he's going into the more basic kind of cursing or saying bad things about something, which is food. Do not criticize. So tadhummanna is actually less than tal'an. Tal'an is worse. Tadhummanna is do not criticize anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, anything from the creation of Allah. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not criticize food, bad food ever. He would not even criticize bad food ever, because whenever he liked something, he would eat it. If he didn't like it, he would just leave it alone. But he wouldn't sit there and make fun out of it. Somehow, some people feel that when they go to a restaurant and the food is not good enough, they criticize them that this is really bad food. I guess what they're probably criticizing in that case is that the amount of money they're charging is probably not, they could probably say that the amount of money that they're charging is not worth the amount, is not worth the quality of the food that they're producing, which is maybe a bit of a different thing there, as opposed to like just criticizing the food for the sake of criticizing the food. So the main thing is try not to curse anybody, try not to criticize anybody as far as possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us in that. Some of us may just have a very kind of critical nature because maybe we just see that others are not doing, not as perfectionist as we are. So if we do have to criticize somebody, we have to be very careful that we do it purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it doesn't become a personal thing. Actually, sometimes when we may even be doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's also possible. Actually, it's also possible that we may then become just habituated to do it as well. So you have to be really careful that every time you do criticize something for a certain benefit, for example, if you've got a roommate who's cooked something and you want them to be better, for example, you criticize them in a nice way. You probably say as how about if someone eats something and comments on what's missing in the food, for example, salt. Again, it just depends on why you're doing it. If you're doing it just to make the other person realize and be better or whatever, then I could probably see some justification for that. But if it's just for the sake of finding trouble and just criticizing for the sake of it, then that would be wrong. And then again, another question is, how about if someone eats something and comments on what's missing in the food? Is that considered criticism? That's definitely criticism, but criticism doesn't have to always be wrong. Criticism can be constructive and positive. So it just depends on the intention with which you're doing it, and also, you see, sometimes our intention may be correct, but the way we're doing it may not be the best of ways. So there's a lot of things to watch out on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to have better character, so that we can do these things properly if we have to do it. So the Prophet ﷺ, his case was that if he was ever invited or whatever, and again, this would work here as well. If you're ever invited somewhere and you just don't like the food, then basically you don't have to criticize it. You're on a diet that day, I guess, right? As a lot of people like to say. The way to stop criticizing somebody else, if you've got a habit of doing so, cursing actually somebody else, if you've got a, if we've got a problem of doing that, is to just try to focus on our own imperfections and our own problems and our own shortcomings, and that way just withhold yourself. What happens sometimes is that the nafs just feels this sense of ecstasy, this sense of satisfaction when they criticize somebody else. It's like you just have to get it out of your body. Now, that's just a psychological problem that you're dealing with. That's just a nafsi problem that a person is dealing with. If they're able to hold themselves back 2 or 3 times, it'll become much easier to hold themselves back afterwards. It's just about habituating the nafs to not cursing somebody. So again, like I mentioned yesterday, if you're going to go into a situation where you think you're going to start cursing something or whatever, just brace yourself from before and say, I'm not going to do it regardless of what it is. Just don't allow your nafs the satisfaction. Once you've suppressed yourself enough times, then eventually you won't even feel the urge to do it. Because what happens with the nafs is that it becomes accustomed to doing something and it gets a satisfaction out of it. So then it wants to do it all the time. Once you've deprived it a few times, the good thing about the nafs is that once you've deprived it a few times, it will actually stop doing it, and then you won't even urge you anymore. So somehow we've developed an urge for doing this. We have to just take that urge out. Right? Sometimes it's a bit more difficult than others depending on how deep-rooted that problem is, but that's the way to do it, which is to just deprive yourself of doing that. So if you're going to go into some place where you're going to eat or whatever, just brace yourself that even if I don't like the food, for example, I'm not going to curse it, I'm not going to say what it is. Right? Or if somebody comes and shows you a project, like you're a teacher or something, and people are showing you projects, just try to brace yourself that I'm not going to criticize it or something. السابع الدعاء على الخلق. The 7th one is praying against people. Again, this is very similar to this in the sense that you're doing something, you're basically praying against somebody, which is a kind of a curse in a sense. Imam Ghazali says, احفظ لسانك عن الدعاء على أحد من خلق الله تعالى وإن ظلمك وكل أمره إلى الله تعالى ففي الحديث إن المظلوم لا يدعو على ظالمه حتى يكافئه ثم يبقى للظالم فضل عنده يطالبه به يوم القيامة. That's the dangerous part. You see, if somebody does something wrong to you, you do have the right to take some kind of revenge, but only to that amount that they have wronged you, and that revenge can be in the form of praying against them. However, the problem with that is that since what they did to you may be physical, what you're doing back to them is abstract. Or you could also work in the physical, where you're doing something physical back to them. It's likely, or it's possible that you may go even a small amount over the limit and over the amount that has been done to you. Now they've got one against you. Until now you had one against them, but now they've just got something against you on the Day of Judgment. Right? So be very careful in what you do. And praying against them holds the same kind of ruling. He says, احفظ لسانك عن الدعاء على أحد. That protect your tongue from praying against anybody from among the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So who are you going to pray against? You're not going to pray against Allah. You're not going to pray against any of the creation of Allah. That means you're not going to pray against anything. Right? وَإِنْ ظَلَمَكَ. Even if the person oppresses you in some way, don't pray against them. Rather than that, a better thing to do is to leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather than take matters in your own hand, leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. As Yaqub alayhi salam said that, فَوَّضْتُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I've delegated my situation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in a hadith it says that an oppressed person may pray against his oppressor until he has fully taken his revenge, or he has fully expiated, until he has requited him. ثُمَّ يَبْقَى لِلظَّالِمِ. Then after that, because the person went a bit over the limit, for example, the oppressor will have some credit, against him, which he will demand from him on the Day of Judgment. There's many stories about, for example, regarding one particular scholar. He was sitting down in his gathering, and this person who had great jealousy for him, he came up to him once and he said that, I want to marry your mother. So the Sheikh said, my mother is obviously an adult woman, and she has the right to choose for herself. She's, according to even the Shafi'i school, she's a thayyibah. I can't give her in marriage to you just like that, although I am her wakil, but I have to ask her. And basically he was just answering that just to avoid any fitna with the person, because he knows that the person was just trying to cause a problem. So he said, okay, I'll go and ask. And then he turned around and the other person died. The other person just fell down dead. And the scholar heard a sound saying, قَتَلَهُ صَبْرُكَ. That your patience killed him, basically. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved this person so much, this sheikh and scholar so much, that he left his matter to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of cursing the person or rebuking him or whatever about what he had said in front of everybody. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't like it at all. Another incident that's been related is that there was another particular pious person who somebody said something to. And this pious person slapped the other person quickly. She said, that seems very strange coming from you. He said, yes, had I not slapped you and shown a kind of a revenge, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have avenged me, and that would have been worse for you. So this was actually out of mercy for you that I slapped you. I slapped you even this much, just to make sure that you don't get a worse punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وطول بعض الناس لسانه في الحجاج فقال له بعض السلف إن الله لا ينتقم للحجاج ممن تعرض له بلسانه كما ينتقم من الحجاج لمن ظلمه. Now, as you know, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was supposed to be one of those who killed a number of different Sahaba. He was a governor in Iraq, and he was very merciless in that sense. Now, some people have gone a bit overboard in speaking about Hajjaj in this negative way and criticizing him. Right? طَوَّلَ لِسَانَهُ means that they were excessive in their criticism of him. So it led to some of the Salaf, some of the pious predecessors saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will avenge for Hajjaj will take a revenge for Hajjaj from all of those who criticized him with their tongue, just as he will take revenge for all of those who Hajjaj oppressed. So although Hajjaj will be asked and questioned about all of those people he oppressed, which Allah is definitely going to take care of anyway, whether we say something or not, but at the same time that those people who said something against Hajjaj, whereas they had no right to say anything because he didn't do anything to them, they were excessive in what they said about him without just relating who he was historically and what he did, then basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to avenge that as well, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to question those people, and if it's found that they were excessive in that, they're going to be punished for that, or something is going to be given to Hajjaj for that. So the best thing is to just not pray against anybody. And as one of our teachers explained it, he said that when somebody does something against you, you have certain things in your power to do back to them. You could either criticize them, you could spoil their life, you could, worst comes to worst, somebody's going to kill the other person, right, or punish them or whatever. But whatever you do is very limited compared to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to do. If you leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of it in the best manner possible. So there's no point you doing that, but let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take care of it. And He has the way in doing that. Obviously, the most merciful approach would be to just forgive them and say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them and enhance them and make them better. For example, a friend of mine who's a sheikh up in the Portland area, once his son, I remember he came and he had a problem with some other kid, and he was just criticizing the other kid and saying bad things about him. So the sheikh said to him, like, why say bad things about him for? Because that's just going to make him worse. That's not going to necessarily make the matter better. What you should do rather than that is to pray for him and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes him better, because you have to spend time with this person. This person is in your class for the rest of the year. If you just criticize him and he remains like that, right, it's not going to really help you or anybody else. Rather than that, if you make dua for the person, right, and you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to improve him or enhance him, it's going to be good for all of you, right? So take the better approach. So if you look at it from that perspective, it's a much better approach. I was asking about people speaking about food and just stating what is missing from the food, example, lack of salt, etc. Yeah, again, it just depends on the reason why you're asking. If you're asking just to improve them in some way, and you're doing it purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that sense that you're not doing it out of some kind of personal grudge or contempt. See, because criticism is different from contempt, right? Then it should be fine. But again, there needs to be a wisdom in the way that it's done. Regarding Yazid, you mentioned Al-Ghazali said not to curse him. How to show our anger against what he did, especially that some Wahhabis say radiyallahu anhu. I don't think Wahhabis say radiyallahu anhu. There is a group actually who's called the Yazidi group, who consider him to be somebody very special and so on, who've gone to the extreme. I don't think they're Wahhabis. Right, again, our criticism of Wahhabis should not lead to us, saying things of that nature either, being a bit more careful about that. I'm not sure, I haven't heard many Wahhabis saying that, but I have heard that there's a group, I believe it's in Egypt or somewhere else, that consider him to be something very special. So it's like the opposite of the Shia. And there were some scholars of the past who did that as well. It's related from Ibn Abdul Barr Maliki, I think, or one of the Maliki scholars as well. I forget exactly who it was. So that obviously, even if somebody does that, if there's a reason where we need to say how bad he was, that's different. But just to go around saying it for no apparent reason, or making that that the subject of the khutbah as such, right, without there being any need to, then that would be wasting time. Is it backbiting if it is about non-Muslims? Yes, many scholars, although some scholars restrict this to backbiting about Muslims being prohibited only because of the hadith which says that ذِكْرُكَ أَخَاكَ بِمَا يَكْرَهُ, which is that you're mentioning your brother, right, and your brother's normally Muslim in that sense. However, it still goes to the same thing, that you're backbiting about somebody and something. There's still prohibition for that, or it's still makruh, because you're bringing something on your tongue which you have no use for. You're going to be asked about it. Whether, unless there's a valid reason for backbiting about somebody, then whether that's a Muslim or not, it doesn't really matter. For example, tell somebody about somebody's evil so that they can avoid being swindled by that person, or being robbed by that person, or whatever it is. I found something on Sunni Path about Yazid and sent it to the Bidayah group about not cursing him because it's useless. Okay. I just want to clarify that backbiting doesn't matter if it's the truth. It's the matter of the person being spoken about. If they heard what you were saying, they would be upset. That's right. That's absolutely right. In fact, in some cases, then that praise would also become backbiting. Right? Maybe to a lower degree, but it will become backbiting. For example, somebody does not like their praise to be made for certain reason, and you're praising them behind their back. That may also be constituted as backbiting, because you're doing something which, if you said in front of them, would harm them or upset them. I have been early each day on Messenger, at least 10 minutes early. I think there was just a tech problem. Allahu A'lam. Yeah, okay. Inshallah, we'll work on that. Inshallah, we'll work on that. I know some Wahhabis who say radiyallahu anhu. Oh, okay. Well, they're probably Wahhabis and Yazidis as well at the same time. Sorry for calling in late. We'll call at exactly 6:30 am inshallah, without waiting for a group conference invite. That's a good idea. Yeah, because that's fine. As long as I'm around, just call in. The Yazidis are in Iraq. Yazidis are in Iraq. Yes. I have learnt a saint to send gifts to one who backbited about him. When asked, he reasoned that why not? Because the man was favoring me for my hereafter by backbiting me, and my gift is trivial in return for that. Absolutely true. I've heard that as well. In fact, one of the scholars said that if you want to backbite about somebody, backbite about your mother, because at least your rewards are going to somebody who you would like to benefit, as opposed to trying to benefit those people who you hate for whatever reason, right? So, I once heard that backbiting gives the person you are speaking about your blessings. I once heard that backbiting gives the person you are speaking about your blessings. Have you heard of this? Yes, I mean, it gives it in the sense that they've got one against you, and in the hereafter, you're going to have to pay them. You're going to have to pay them in deeds, because you're not going to have the money or something else to pay them with. So that's how that works out. Does backbiting about non-Muslims have the same ruling as about Muslims, i.e. it's a major sin? It would depend on what you're saying. I mean, it would depend on what you're saying, how serious it is, and what you're saying, and how bad it is. I think that's what it would depend on, in terms of how much sin you'll get for that. Allah knows best. I'm not sure. I heard women backbite more than men do. I mean, I'm under the assumption that you are a sister as well, right? Because lazy girl, I don't see a boy using that name. You're probably, I don't want to make that judgment. I've heard that as well. I don't want to necessarily make that judgment. Maybe some of the other sisters can mention that and can confirm that. But if you're a sister and you think so, then that might be the case, right? There is a hadith that states, although I want to talk about your name afterwards, inshallah. There is a hadith that states that women are half the occupants of hell because they curse in abundance, are ungrateful to their husbands. Right. That's that hadith is absolutely true. I mean, it's in Sahih al-Bukhari as far as I remember, and basically, it's just that what happens is, because the woman is normally more emotional, but again, this can be controlled, right, for the woman who's really tried to balance herself out and, develop good character. So it's all about that. It's just that naturally men have certain weaknesses and women have certain weaknesses. And one of the weaknesses of women is emotion. And when you get emotional, you use the tongue, because physically you're not going to use it. For example, a husband and wife have an argument. You may notice that most of the time the wife will just say certain crazy things to the husband, because that's the power that they have, the power of the tongue, right? And the emotion just brings that on. So it's something that you have to curb. It's something that you have to bring in. Like people speaking bad about the president, it's part of normal conversation usually. Again, it depends on why you're speaking bad about him. If you're speaking bad about him, about the things that he's doing and so on, just to let people know about it, right, and to reveal that, or to discuss the issue so that you can bring out some kind of solution, then there's no problem in doing that. But if it's just for the sake of pastime, just to criticize somebody, then there's no benefit in doing that. And again, it's just wasting time. You could be doing dhikr in that time, you could be making dua for the Muslims around that time, and that would give you much more reward, and that would have a better effect than just criticizing somebody. Where is the line drawn between describing people and backbiting about their physical features, height, etc. when you are trying to remind someone of a person who they are? Again, you have to be very careful in that as well. For example, I remember once the teacher asked in the class that, who sits next to you? Right? I said, such and such a person. So he kind of looked questioningly as, who's that person you're speaking about? He couldn't remember. So I said, the short, and I kind of put my hand out to show that the person was short. Now obviously I'm very tall, so I'm showing that the person is very short. So the Sheikh didn't say anything then, but as then that student came and joined the class, right? He came and joined the class, and immediately as he came and sat down, the Sheikh said to me, ask him for forgiveness because you backbited him. He said it in a very cool way. He's like, go ask him for forgiveness because you backbite him. So I just turned around and asked him for forgiveness. So basically, the reason he said that is possible that this colleague of mine did not like himself to be described in that way. Although he is short, but had I said that in front of him, that this guy who's short, and I put my hand out to express that, he probably would dislike it. So that would even become ghibah, right? And alhamdulillah, I was reminded to ask for forgiveness there and there. So you have to be really careful. Sometimes backbiting just becomes a habit, and you have to be really careful in trying not to do it. And if you know that a certain gathering or a certain person, when they get together, they're always going to backbite, just try to avoid it. I know it feels good sometimes just to talk about other people, but that's what you have to be worried about, right? So yes, physical feature, height, etc., that could be backbiting. Sorry about that, lol, please don't criticize me for it. Yeah, now you're using that against you, now you're using that to your benefit, right? Anyway, a friend asked me a question regarding ghibah, and he doesn't know if the following scenario is ghibah. My friend called person A regarding a professional issue, and person A said that he will call him in 2 days. He didn't call him in 2 days. Then person B asked my friend about the issue he had with person A, and my friend said person A never called me back. He is used to don't respond to some emails or return some phone calls. Is that ghibah? It is a case where if you don't say anything about a person, people would think that you are not serious in your work or that you're co-responsible of the problem. It really depends on what the intention was. And when you say he normally does not call back, I mean, if you were to said it very, very sincerely, where, you know what, he hasn't called me back, he normally doesn't call people back, and maybe that's what the reason, you're trying to just justify, I guess. You have to be really careful in what you're doing, right, in why you said that. So if you said it and submitted it with all sincerity, just purely to show the other person that you haven't been lax, right, otherwise you'd get into trouble, or you would be looked upon as being lazy or whatever, then it may be possible. But if you can find a way where you can exonerate both of yourselves, then that's fine, or correct the other person in some way or the other, that would be better. But I can see where this would be valid as long as it's permissible, as long as you do it with sincerity and there's a particular reason that you do it for. Isn't there a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ reprimanded Aisha because she indicated about someone who came in as being short? I think I remember that as well, yes. Hadith where Aisha radiallahu anha mentioned short in description of another mother of the believers, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded that that world could have poisoned the oceans or something to that extent. I'm not exactly sure of the wording of that hadith, but I do remember the incident. I do remember the incident about her saying something about somebody. If you are in gathering where someone is backbiting another and you do not say anything nor leave, does some of the sin fall on you, and does it become incumbent for you to ask for forgiveness as well? Yes, it does, because the listener is also one of the two persons to do ghibah, because the person is only going to do ghibah when there's others involved, right? So it's necessary to either say to them to stop, to show some form of disapproval, because again the hadith will come back where you're saying try to change with your hand, if you can't then with your tongue, otherwise at least feel bad about it. So in this case you would actually try to stop them from doing it. If you are unable to do that and it's just going to cause a big fitna or whatever, then you would actually try to show some disapproval. If you can't even do that, then you would leave, you would go away from it, right? If I've heard that asking forgiveness may actually cause more harm than good. In some case that is the case. You have to judge the situation. Whereas asking for forgiveness, if it's going to just make the matters worse, because the person, let's say the person doesn't know that you backbited about them, right? And then you go and tell them, I backbited about you. They're going to wonder who you were talking about, what you were saying, and so on and so forth. So rather than go through all of that, sometimes the ulama mentioned that it's better just to make enough dua for them or give some charity on their behalf and seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to please those people on the day of judgment who you've backbited against, so that they don't have a case against you and Allah just makes them happy. So you have to keep doing that until you think that you have repaid them for the wrong that you've caused them, right? Which is a very difficult thing, but you have to do your best for that. I think we're quite over time, right? So let's keep it up to date. Anybody who has any questions, they can ask me privately. At least we can, finish the dars off officially, right? Can't one make dua for the person who has spoken about if one feels asking forgiveness would make things worse? Yeah, we just covered that. Do you have to tell a person who was backbited about what was said about them if they want to know? Again, if you think it's going to cause a fitna, it's better to avoid, right? Because then other people become involved in everything and you're just causing a bigger conflict, right? However, if the person already knows that you were speaking about them, then in that case, it's best to go and tell them, definitely. Let's say that you have done backbiting. How should you go about and ask for forgiveness if you think that it will hurt the person, or the person will not like being talked about badly or might stop being your friend? So I guess I've already answered that question in the sense that you will make dua for them and you'll try to rectify this matter in an absent way, in absentia basically. Or should you just ask the person, please forgive me if I had done or said anything to have offended you ever? You could do that as well. That's actually a good one. Maybe when you're going for Hajj or something, you can kind of get a general forgiveness from the person, right? But also at the same time, you need to make tawbah. I don't think that's simple, because they may not realize how deep this goes. So they might just be thinking you're just talking about some petty issues or something. So I would say that other than doing that, I think it's also good, right, to make the dua and everything, in absentia, to make sure that you've really requited yourself from it. Anyway, Jazakumullah khairan. This ghiba session is normally always a very interesting session, but it's good that people are concerned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.